Just seeing King Charles and Queen Camilla about to exit their car now to be welcomed by the President, the Royal Roller, I like that. Cameron, you are there as Queen Camilla and the King emerge.
Yes, and you can just see them there on your screens being greeted by President Macron of France and his wife. A formal welcome here at the Arc de Triomphe. It's a ceremonial arrival, a very rare one, which Queen Elizabeth II, the late Queen Elizabeth II, did in 2014, her final state visit. The King will be invited by President Macron. You can just see them there walking towards the Arc de Triomphe. He'll be invited to symbolically light the eternal flame which burns in memory of those who perished in the First and Second World Wars. We're expecting the national anthem to be played, and the King and President Macron will review the regimental band of the Garde Républicaine, followed by the French Colour Party, before inspecting the Tri-Service Guard of Honour. And His Majesty is just coming into my view now alongside President Macron. It looks like they are just about to inspect those soldiers. So as I said, they're going to be reviewing the regimental band, which you'll probably be able to hear, of the Garde Républicaine, followed by the French Colour Party and a Tri-Service Guard of Honour. It looks like the King and President Macron are exchanging some pretty warm words. They look pretty friendly towards each other. It's unclear if they are speaking in French or English, but of course we do know that the King does speak fluent French. So here they are just going up to the regimental band of the Garde Républicaine, inspecting those soldiers, followed by the French Colour Party, and here is the national anthem.
Still your neighbours, and we are still your friends. You can hear the British national anthem being played at this very moment for their arrival. Let's pause and have a short listen. The music will last until Friday afternoon when they play home.
Tri-Service Guard of Honour consists of 8 half companies. Each of the army, we can just hear the French national anthem now, but each of the army half companies will be provided by regiments with a particular affiliation to a British regiment under the bonds of friendship twinning arrangements established between the French and British armies. Again, it's that theme of collaboration, strengthening friendships, the power of soft diplomacy that the British monarchy has. This is pomp and pageantry in action, yes, but it's also two friendly nations, very close nations, strengthening their bonds, particularly in the quite unsettled world with the war in Eastern Europe, post-Brexit, of course. But it looks like now France and Britain's relationship is going very strong indeed, aided by His Majesty the King, because don't forget, the King and the Queen choose to go on these state visits on the advice of the Foreign Office, who make the political diplomatic decisions. And we have the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, observing all of this as well.
Cameron, there is plenty of security there, but as Martin touched on earlier, no crowds. A big media contingent, but it's very strange not to see lots of people watching this spectacle.
Yeah, security is incredibly tight here. It took us, as the media, a very long time to get through to this position where we are. In fact, speaking to other media who've covered the royal beat a lot longer than I have, they said they've never seen anything like it. And the crowds are being kept way back and will be, I think, unlikely to be able to see any of it other than the big screens. There have been a few big screens which have been put up on the road surrounding the Arc de Triomphe. There's a huge one right next to the archway, but perhaps disappointing for the crowds. But of course you have to remember that 6 months ago this state visit had to be postponed because of the riots over the French pension reforms, and the King and Queen were meant to visit the Bordeaux Town Hall, and that actually ended up in flames because of those riots. So it just shows how seriously the French security services are taking this visit. They really want it to go without a hitch, because it was quite embarrassing for the French government having to postpone it such last minute, and particularly because the German state visit was such a success. The French government are really going to want to make this visit as successful, if not more successful, than the German one. The King and President Macron just walked past the position where I am in. They are inspecting this tri-service guard of honour at the moment, so that should be what you're seeing on your screens now.
And Cameron, I wonder how much of this is about the optics for Macron himself. He was recently booed at a French rugby match, and is the keeping of the crowds away to try and limit the opportunity for people to protest, not against the royals, as we saw at the coronation in London, the risk of that, but to protest against Macron himself. So for that reason, security is incredibly tight to ensure there's no domestic embarrassment in Paris.
Well, we can only speculate, can't we? Of course, the King has come here as a guest of President Macron, but I think it is pretty interesting that there doesn't seem to be any members of the public allowed anywhere near it. What will be interesting is in the engagements over the next 3 days, which is how long this state visit is lasting, when President Macron is not accompanying the King, if it is quite as tight security. I suspect security is going to be pretty tight. I know there have been a few last-minute changes for security concerns, but of course they want this first ceremonial official welcome, arguably one of the most important bits, to go without a hitch. The King...
We can see pictures now, Cameron, of President Macron, King Charles walking together across the square. They're having a good old chat, past all the regimental flags of those assembled to witness this, a majestic sight.
Yes, this is the King and President Macron symbolically rekindling, or about to rekindle, the eternal flame. A wreath of French and British colours is being laid on behalf of the King and President Macron by two soldiers at the tomb of the unknown soldier underneath the Arc de Triomphe, and perhaps a moment of silence and reflection for those who lost their lives during the First and Second World Wars. President Macron gesturing to His Majesty the King there, meeting the dignitaries and those specially invited guests.
And as we
here we
watch,
are, I believe, rekindling the eternal flame.
Cameron, as we watch these pictures, you can tell that this state visit really does mean something for President Macron. He's rolled out all the stops for this.
Yeah, he really has. As I said, it's incredibly rare for French presidents to invite a visiting head of states to have this big ceremonial welcome at the Arc de Triomphe. It doesn't happen very often. The King's mother, the late Queen Elizabeth II, receives the same thing in 2014. But I think it just shows how important President Macron and his government are taking this visit of His Majesty the King and Queen.
Yeah, and that eternal flame there lit, Cameron, a wonderful reminder of the historic bond between these two nations, cemented in unfortunate circumstances, of course, in war, but a wonderful, wonderful sight.
It certainly is. I mean, this is the power of soft diplomacy in picture form. I would argue this is the French and British citizens, people, governments, and heads of state strengthening ties. And following this ceremonial welcome at the Arc de Triomphe, perhaps there'll be
Oh, lost Cameron there
Oh,
again.
it looks like we've lost Cameron Walker, but we do still have our royal commentator, Michael Cole. Michael, we were just reflecting on the power of soft diplomacy, and this will be a very welcome sight, or this is a welcome sight, isn't it, for people?
When you see that, that's very symbolic and it's very real. And you'll notice that the king is wearing the emblem of the Légion d'honneur in his left lapel, along with a cornflower from England. And likewise, the President, Macron, there, also the insignia of the Légion d'honneur. Every single royal visit, state visit, this was supposed to be the first state visit of the new king's reign. And well, it's come a little bit later, but it's no less significant. It's very important because they're our nearest neighbours and our allies since the Entente Cordiale of 1904. And it's worth remembering that this king's grandmother, the Queen Mother, who we all remember, she went on a state visit in 1938. War clouds were gathering. We needed French support. We wanted to show our support. And she went with King George VI, even though 6 days before the visit, her mother, Countess of Strathmore, died. So brilliantly, they postponed it for a couple of days, but then she came and they changed her wardrobe. She wore all white, just burnt colour, mourning. And she wowed.
Yeah.
Michael, we'll just listen in as this ceremony continues.
Oh, just wonderful. Seeing how God save the King. Michael,
What a beautiful sight, Michael Cole. The national anthems we heard there, and then a flypast.
That was the Patrouille de France. That was the French Red Arrows paying their tribute. I've heard the national anthem sung many times, but never quite like that. Have you ever heard a rendering of God Save the King or Queen like that? And of course, the Marseillaise, which celebrates the men from Marseille who joined the French Revolution 2 centuries ago and made it a success in the sense that à bas le roi, down with the king. The French lost their king, Louis XVI. They guillotined him at the other end of this road, the Champs-Élysées, on the Place de la Concorde. That's where the guillotine was set up. But the French, although they're a republican, a proud republican, a secular country, they've never really fallen out of love with monarchy. A lot of people are fascinated by the British monarchy in particular. And here you see the conviviality, the friendship that's going on there. In the front, though, there was President François Hollande. On the other side, as Cameron mentioned, the British Foreign Secretary James Cleverly keeping an eye on things. Now, the King there is meeting representatives, all of them, of the French Armed Services and emergency services, as far as I can see. And as you mentioned, he speaks French very well. Queen Elizabeth, the late Queen, our much missed Queen, she was fluent in French, which was very important when it came to Francophone Canada, Quebec, and so on, where she spoke very well and very movingly at times. And this is big stuff. This is big medicine in the royal world. To have actually stopped the traffic in the middle of Paris, to close down the main boulevard for this ceremonial. Shows fantastic respect by President Macron and his wife Brigitte, who seem to be getting on very well there with Queen Camilla. Later, there they are together. They're going to inaugurate a new literary prize, a Franco-British literary prize. And of course, Queen Camilla is very big on the restorative power, the recuperative power of reading, how important it is for children and for ordinary people. Here, I think they're showing the king perhaps signatures of very famous people who've signed. So they're all going to sign on this day, this very historic day. Brigitte Macron, president, there with her, and of course the two royal visitors. They've got a tremendous day ahead of them, of course, culminating with this tremendous banquet out at Versailles, built by Louis XIV, the Sun King, in the Hall of Mirrors. A huge long table, 180 feet long, 180 guests, so everybody gets 2 feet of space. And they've had a long table like this so that everybody can go home and say, I sat on the king's table, because of course they did. Whether they were very close to him or not doesn't really matter. Here you are. I think these are probably representatives of the British Legion in France, because there are branches of the British Legion which represents old soldiers and servicemen. And they live in France, so the king is making sure he says hello to them.
And Michael, Michael, as we look at these wonderful images, I know what my late grandmother would be saying. Why isn't Brigitte Macron wearing a hat?
Well, actually, you've made a good point, because poor Queen Camilla, when she arrived on the aircraft, she was struggling in the very, very high wings we've got here, holding onto her hat, holding onto her dress. The king strode down the staircase, and I actually think he could have gone back and helped her a little bit more, because it was a bit of a struggle to keep everything in order. But as you say, what about hats these days? Well, it's very good for the millinery industry when women wear them, but they don't always wear them, do they? I think very few women cannot improve their appearance without wearing a hat. I think hats are a good idea, and they add grace to any occasion. But Brigitte Macron has got fantastic style. She has real French chic. Nobody can deny that. And certainly she looks very, very lovely today. And I'm sure she's wearing something from a French couturier. I wouldn't dare to say which, but she's always immaculately dressed.
OK, Michael, we're going to cut back now to Cameron Walker, live on the ground there at the Arc de Triomphe for GB News. Cameron, what's the latest there?
Well, we just had that incredible surprise flypast by the equivalent of the red arrows here in France, so Patrouille, even aérobatique de France, and now the king and the Queen are being invited to meet government representatives who have gathered to witness the ceremony. You just saw the presidents of the committee invite their majesties to sign what's known as the Golden Book. So that was the big book they just signed underneath the Arc de Triomphe. Following this, you can just see on your screens now their majesties meeting representatives of local veteran organisations, we believe. Scout and Guide organisations are also there, and the British School of Paris. His Majesty is also going to be acknowledging the standard of the committee of the Flame, and he's going to be reviewing the front rank of the regional veterans associations. And you can hear the music, can't you? The atmosphere here is electric. We're almost being drowned out by bagpipes. It's incredibly noisy here. But as you said, of course, there's no crowd noises. There are no members of the public allowed anywhere near the Arc de Triomphe. As Michael was saying, this is usually a very busy thoroughfare, a big roundabout, and all of that has stopped, and the public is being kept way back for security reasons. Perhaps an indication as to how seriously the French government is taking this and want it to go well, to strengthen the relationship between Britain and France, and to avoid any perhaps further embarrassments following the postponement of this state's visit, which was meant to happen 6 months or so ago. It was meant to be King Charles and Queen Camilla's first state visits to, as the new the king as the new monarch, but of course it had to be Germany instead because of the postponements. You can just see the Queen and President Macron there greeting veterans, members of the veterans community, underneath the Arc de Triomphe, the regional veterans associations there. President Macron shaking hands with a number of them, perhaps served in the Second World War, and of course the Arc de Triomphe with the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier underneath it, commemorating soldiers who did fall during the First Wars. The King is also being accompanied by his equerry, Johnny Thompson. I've seen him around, as well as a number of his own staff and big entourage here who have travelled with him to Paris. Again, the King looks like he is in good spirits here, about to inspect the front rank of the regional veterans associations.
Of course, this is a part of the job, Cameron.
Accompanied by...
This is a part of the job, Cameron, that King Charles is, of course, very, very familiar with. You know, the inspections, meeting all the dignitaries. He's done this many, many times.
Yeah, he absolutely has. This is his 35th visit to France, or he's been 35 times. But of course, this is the first time as king. The Queen has been 9 times previously in an official capacity. But pomp and pageantry is what Britain is all about. Usually it's reserved for events in London.
Lost Cameron there. You know, I'm struck by the wondrous nature of Charles greeting veterans from France, some of whom were very elderly, some of whom were in wheelchairs, bearing the Union flag as a standard, some wearing poppies on their lapels, and the pipes playing tunes that would have been played during wartime, would have been ringing out across the trenches of World War I, and of course at the Arc de Triomphe here, when the forces were united in peace at the end of World War II. These pipes have a historical significance, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful thing to hear.
Michael Cole, royal commentator, if we can just bring you back in. When we look at these images of President Macron, King Charles chatting, what message do you think it sends about the current state of Anglo-French relations?
Well, they go up and down, but those relations are forged in blood and fire. In the First World War, nearly 750,000 British and Empire troops died. They died, many of them, on the soil of France. So the King has gone out of his way to shake hands with every single veteran who is present, going into the back row, making sure everybody remembers this occasion, which I'm sure they will. We've just seen the Foreign Secretary representing the government there, and there, I think you have the military equerry from the British Embassy in Paris, undoubtedly so, a full turnout from the embassy. This is a great event for the ambassador and his staff. It's a great event for all of us, because France, our sometimes difficult neighbour, is still our neighbour and has been our close friend and ally through 2 world wars since the Entente Cordiale was signed in 1904. By the King's great-great-grandfather, Edward VII. This is a union. They're about the same size as us in terms of population. We've got about 3 times as much land, of course, and more mountain ranges and countryside and 3 oceans. But they're very close to us, and the history is there. And the King, of course, will be going down to Bordeaux, going to visit an organic vineyard. And, of course, Bordeaux and Aquitaine was the last bit of France, almost the last bit of France that was personally owned by a British king. So the ties there are very, very strong. There you see the King enjoying a chat with the military personnel in their ultra-smart kepi caps. He's talking to a naval officer. They're all anxious to say something to him because He's been through every branch of the service too. And he's got an interpreter there. I don't think he actually needs it. He's getting on with it. And over the years, I've seen very many members of the royal family go to the Western Front, to the huge memorials, to the wonderful arch at Thiepval, which actually rivals the Arc de Triomphe in its size, where the names of all those British people, those men who died and whose graves are unknown on the Western Front. So this is a very, very important thing. It's impossible to exaggerate the importance of the ties that bind us to France. President Macron is going out of his way, patting the king on the back there, making sure he's getting into the right place. It's very important. There's a lot of good things that are going to be happening. And I'm quite sure that when he goes to the National Assembly to address the politicians, I'm sure the king will try a few jokes and pleasantries. He did so in the Bundestag in Berlin, and it was a great triumph. That was a surprise to everybody that he would try that. Now, this man is quite clearly the commander of the Guard Republican who was put on this show today. And the king knows a bit about ceremonial. He knows a bit about what's what. And I think what he's seen today has been highly impressive.
Michael Cole, as always, thank you. Let's rejoin our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker, who has also been watching Paris roll out the red carpet for their majesties. Cameron, we just saw a very affectionate, pat on the back, really, from President Macron towards King Charles. Is he allowed to do that?
He certainly is. I think people have this, there's this myth that no one is allowed to touch His Majesty the King, but I have been reliably informed, because I remember a couple of months ago President Biden did exactly the same thing with the King. I have been informed that the King is absolutely more than comfortable with that sort of intimacy and affectionate behaviour toward with other heads of states, particularly when it's a friendly nation such as France. We can just see the King, accompanied by President Emmanuel Macron, walking back towards the cars, because they are expected to travel to the Élysée Palace, where the King and President Macron will have a meeting, an audience, a private audience, we're told. Of course, he won't be straying too far into politics. It's very much that power of soft diplomacy in action. No doubt they will be talking about this absolute spectacle we have seen at the Arc de Triomphe, with the gigantic French flag and the huge ceremonial and military welcome that King Charles and Queen Camilla has received here in Paris for the start of their first state visit to the country. We've talked about security, haven't we? You can see from those pictures there in the background, there's no members of the public. They are being kept well back. Of course, this whole state visit was delayed because of those of those riots 6 months ago over French pension reforms. We're just seeing the King being introduced to special guests who have been invited to observe this ceremony, the ceremonial welcome here today.
Royal correspondent Cameron Walker, I know you are with them every step of the way during this 3-day state visit. We will rejoin you, but thank you for now. Oh, merci beaucoup.